5%. That was the percentage of Americans that commuted by public transportation in 2019, while 84.8% either drove alone or carpooled. The situation only got worse with the hit of COVID. In 2021, only 2.5% of Americans commuted by public transportation. In the major metropolitan areas, there is a higher percentage of commutes made on public transit, but the vast majority of commutes are still made by cars. But why don't more people choose public transit to get around? How did public transit in America get this bad, and what can we do to fix it? Well, you will find the answers to these questions in this video. Public transit in the US wasn't always unpopular. In fact, railroad was the dominating way of travel in the late 19th century and the early 20th century. The Transcontinental Railroad that opened in 1869 made it easier and faster to move people and goods across the continent, as it would take months before. This triggered the growth of the western part of the US. Many towns emerged with the arrival of the railroad. By 1916, the US had 254,000 miles of railroad tracks, and trains consumed 98% of the intercity passenger traffic. Meanwhile, streetcar lines were dominating city streets and were seen in cities across the country. However, the rise of automobiles started to change the way people got around. By the end of 1920, 23 million cars were on the road. By the end of World War II, the rise of suburbs and the construction of the interstate highways changed how cities were being built. Instead of putting everything in a walking distance, residential, commercial, and other facilities are being put in different locations, making it difficult to reach without a car. As a result of this car-centric planning, government spending focused more on roads and highways instead of mass transit and railroads. In 2023, among the $126.3 billion the federal government spent in the transportation sector, $55.9 billion or 44% were spent on highways, while only $27.5 billion or 22% were spent for mass transit and railroads. Although the investment in transit from the federal government has increased over the years, it is still way lower than the investment in highways. This lack of funding is one of the reasons why transit is so bad in the US, as fare box revenue rarely covers the operational cost. Take the MTA, the transit operator of New York City, as an example. In 2023, the MTA's operating expense is estimated to be $17.7 billion. However, fare box and toll revenue combined only made the MTA $7.07 billion, covering around 40% of the operational cost, while dedicated tax, state and local funds, and other sources of revenue covers the remaining operational cost. The MTA's capital program is even more dependent on funding from federal, state, and local governments and other revenue sources. These are projects like purchase of new rolling stocks, installing new signals, installing elevators, station renovations, and system expansions, etc. The 2020 to 2024 capital program included $54.8 billion of investment in New York City's transportation system, while the latest 2025 to 2029 plan proposed an even higher $65.4 billion investment. These projects can greatly improve the system's reliability, and some are critically needed for the system's future. The funding model in New York City can be seen in many cities across the US. However, the investment on public transit is still behind what is needed. According to the 2021 infrastructure report, there is a $176 billion transit backlog, which could grow to $270 billion through 2029. The underinvestment is leaving many transit agencies across the country in a financial crisis. With the lack of financial support, they have no choice but to reduce service, raise the fare, or even worse than that, doing both of them. None of these options are a good thing for the riders. Not to mention the critical repairs and other capital improvements that may have to be cancelled due to the financial hole. In Philadelphia, SEPTA, the major operator of the city's transit, has just approved a 7.5% fare increase effective in December 2024, with a second proposed increase for January 2025. If the second fare hike is approved, SEPTA riders will have to pay an average of 29% more. What is even worse is that the higher fare does not exchange for better service, as SEPTA is planning on service cuts in early 2025. Similar situations can be found in transit systems across the country. At the end of the day, it is the riders that have to face the fare hikes, longer waits, and less reliable service. In MOVE's 2024 Global Public Transport Report, riders said that higher frequency, Better reliability and lower fare costs are the three main factors that will encourage them to take public transit. On the other hand, uncertainties in these factors would trigger riders to switch to their car. With fewer riders, even less money is invested into public transit from the government, and less money is collected from fare revenue, which leads to even more service cuts and even more riders leaving. And the cycle just repeats itself. And I already know what public transit opponents will say here. Look, public transit doesn't make any profit and it relies on government funding and taxes to operate. Why not just stop operating it to save money? Whether public transit should make a profit or not is a topic for another video. But do you know what also doesn't make a profit? Roads and highways. Yes, roads and highways don't pay for themselves either. Well, highway advocates would tell you that the construction and maintenance cost of highways are covered by gasoline taxes and other charges on drivers. They actually don't, not even close. In fact, these so-called user fees usually only covers half of the cost, and the amount they cover are at historic low points. For state and local roads, tolls, taxes, and other user fees only cover 53.4% of its cost in 2016. And by now, we have only been talking about the financial cost, but car infrastructure also has a cost to the environment and public health. Public transit, on the other hand, has various environmental and social benefits that we haven't taken into consideration when revenues were calculated. To fix the financial deficit leading to higher fares, less service, and fewer riders, the federal, state, and city governments have to prioritize and increasingly fund transit, not just to subsidize the basic operational cost, but also for the much-needed capital improvements. Besides government funding, transit agencies should also seek for other long-term and stable revenue sources. In New York, the MTA will be implementing congestion pricing, a toll that will charge drivers entering Manhattan south of 60th Street. MTA estimates that the congestion pricing can generate a revenue of $15 billion. This revenue is expected to fund a portion of the 2025 to 2029 capital program, which will bring many much-needed improvements for the system. Another way to raise money for transit is through ballot measures, where a proposal on a source of revenue for public transit is decided by voters. These sources could include bonds, a sales tax, a property tax, etc. A study has shown the effectiveness of this method as ballot measures for public transportation has a 70% approval rate and the support for it has crossed political lines. Finally, I want to mention revenue from real estate rents, where land owned by transit agencies are leased out for development into residential, commercial, or office spaces. These lands are usually near transit stations, which means they can be developed as a transit-oriented development, or TOD for short. This revenue source has been implemented by multiple transit agencies across the country, including the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority and New Jersey Transit. Real estate can be a stable and long-term revenue stream for transit agencies, but more importantly, creating more density around transit stations can potentially increase ridership, therefore reduces traffic congestions and emissions. There are other revenue sources that could be considered, but I won't be mentioning them for the sake of time. I will probably make a dedicated video on revenue sources for public transit in the future, so stay tuned. With increase in funding and revenue, transit agencies can make the necessary investments to improve the system. With quality service, riders will consider coming back and take transit again. While the unreliable service caused by prioritizing cars and underfunding transit is a reason to the ridership drop, 45% of the country has no transit access to start with. These neighborhoods that have little to no transit access are called transit deserts. While some of these neighborhoods does have the population and density to support transit, the insane cost and time needed for transit construction in North America has stopped them from getting better transit. There are many reasons that has led to the high cost and time consumption of building new transit projects, but that is a topic that deserves a dedicated video, so stay tuned. But if we could lower the construction costs and generate funding through the methods I mentioned earlier, more of these transit deserts can get better transit access. But not all transit deserts are the same. Many of these transit deserts are post-war style suburbs, primarily made up of single-family homes. These places are difficult to serve with traditional fixed-route transit lines, as there isn't a density and ridership to support it. However, This doesn't mean public transit cannot work here, as many suburban areas have been trying out on-demand transit, where passengers enter an origin and destination on an app, and the ride will be shared with other passengers that have a similar route. On-demand transit is the most suitable way to provide public transit access in low-density areas compared to fixed routes. In the long run, however, suburbs should seek a way to add more density and become more walkable so more transit options could be supported. Suburbs should also consider rezoning land near transit stations, as these lands could support developments with greater transit access. To conclude, fixing public transit requires collaborative efforts of different sectors. Increasing government funding and finding other revenue sources is just the beginning. Reconsidering the land use and zoning policies will also be important, as dense and walkable neighborhoods could better support transit. As individuals, start advocating for transit could be a great start, while joining advocacy groups, attending transit agencies, public hearings are all ways to make a difference. As an urban planner and transit advocate, I am very aware of the social, economic, and environmental benefits of public transit. The fact that the U.S. once had great public transit shows that public transit can work in the U.S. It just requires initial investments to gain long-term benefits in return. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing and supporting me via channel membership or super thanks. If you want to learn more about transit-related topics, check out this playlist. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in that playlist.